A full-grown wild lion is running straight at two men who haven't seen him in over a year, and for one very long second, neither man is sure whether to hold his ground or run. It's 1971, on a stretch of scrubland in Kenya called Kora. The lion's name is Christian. A year earlier, John Rendell and Ace Burke had left him here with George Adamson, a conservationist whose job was turning a lion raised in a London flat back into an actual wild animal. Adamson had warned them plainly. Don't expect anything. Lions don't sit around missing people. Whatever bond existed had almost certainly been replaced by territory, by a pride, by instincts a house pet was never supposed to develop. Then Christian saw them. He stopped on the hillside, stared for a moment that must have felt endless, and ran, not away, toward them, closing the distance until he collided into both men hard enough to knock them backward, front legs draped over their shoulders, face pressed into theirs, the way an overexcited dog greets someone at the door. That is not supposed to happen. The entire purpose of releasing a captive animal back into the wild is to erase this exact outcome. A rewilded lion that still runs toward humans hasn't been successfully rewilded. It's been left half-tame, which most conservationists treat as a problem, occasionally a dangerous one. Christian was fully wild, fully capable of ignoring two strangers on a hillside, and chose not to. He isn't the only one. Wild elephants have walked for miles to reach the same humans who once treated their wounds as calves, arriving years later, fully grown, with no obvious reason left to remember one person by name. Gray whales descended from animals that once smashed whaling boats apart to protect their young, now swim into the same lagoon every winter and lift their newborns out of the water for strangers to touch. Something in a small number of animals seems to run in exactly the opposite direction from everything evolution built it to do, filing one specific human, or one group of them, under safe and keeping that file open for years. So why would an animal shaped by 100,000 years of good reasons to fear us do the opposite? The easy answer arrives preloaded. They remember who fed them. Simple conditioning, a biscuit and a bond. But that explanation collapses the moment you meet an elephant calf who was never fed by anyone, or a whale approaching a boat that never personally rescued it. Whatever is actually happening here is stranger than a memory of snacks, and it starts with something most rewilding programs would rather you didn't need to know. The stated goal of wildlife rehabilitation isn't friendship, it's independence, teaching an animal to file humans, in general, under avoid, the same category every other wild creature already uses. Keepers limit contact for exactly this reason. An elephant that loses its fear of people in general is an elephant that eventually walks toward the wrong vehicle. So when an animal spends years building a life that requires none of this and then walks back anyway toward specific people and nobody else, that isn't the program succeeding. That's an individual animal quietly overriding it. At a reintegration camp called Voi in Kenya, keepers with the Sheldrick Wildlife Trust recently watched an elephant named Naipoki walk in from the bush after months away, her 7-month-old son beside her. Naipoki had been raised there as an orphan and returned to the wild years ago. Her son, Nsimba, was born after that, entirely in the wild, and had never once been bottle-fed, named, or handled by a keeper. He wasn't afraid. He drank calmly a few feet from the same people his mother had once depended on just to survive. Somehow, none of the fear that comes standard with being a wild elephant had reached him. Naipoki remembering her own childhood is one story, a single animal's long memory. Nsimba's calm is a different one, because he has no memory to draw on. Nothing ever happened to him here. Whatever let him walk in relaxed had to come from somewhere else, which means the real question isn't only whether one elephant can remember one human, it's whether that information can travel. In 2014, a researcher named Karen McComb at the University of Sussex tried to find out how far it actually reaches. Working with wild elephant families in Amboseli National Park, her team played recordings of men calmly saying the same sentence in 2 languages, one from the Maasai, who occasionally clash with elephants over grazing land, and one from the Kamba, farmers who rarely do. None of the elephants had heard either specific voice before. It didn't matter. Within seconds of the Maasai recording, families bunched together defensively, sniffing the air for a threat. The Kamba recording barely registered. The elephants weren't reacting to individual people at all. They were reacting to a category, built from generations of information about which kinds of humans tend to be dangerous. which means an elephant's mental file on humans isn't a single folder marked predator. It's closer to a constantly updated database, cross-referenced by voice and scent and clothing, drawing on encounters no single elephant personally lived through. If that system can hold an entire group's worth of inherited information, one specific family of keepers earning a permanent exception starts to look less like magic and more like exactly the kind of thing this system exists to do. Which brings us to the animals for whom that explanation falls apart completely, because there's no individual relationship left to fall back on at all. In 1972, a fisherman named Francisco Pacheco Mayoral was working alone in a small boat on Laguna San Ignacio, off Baja California, in waters where gray whales had earned their reputation the hard way. Decades of whaling had taught the species that humans meant harpoons, and mothers defending calves had been known to ram whaling boats hard enough to break them apart, enough that whalers called them devilfish. Pacheco wasn't hunting. He was just fishing, keeping his usual distance, when a full-grown gray whale surfaced beside his boat and stayed there. Half out of nerve, he reached down and touched her. She didn't pull away. That touch is now more than 50 years and several generations old. The whales of San Ignacio still return to that lagoon every winter, and mothers still lift newborn calves, animals that didn't exist when Pacheco first reached into that water, up to the sides of small boats, so strangers can run a hand along skin that 3 generations back belonged to a species with every documented reason to consider that hand a threat. None of which means we should reach for the most flattering explanation just because it feels good. Researchers who study this stay careful with a word like trust, for good reason. Even Christian's story gets messier up close. When Rendell and Burke returned a second time, a year after that famous reunion, Christian was a different animal. Bigger, calmer, noticeably more distant. He sat with them a while, the way you'd sit with people you used to know, then got up and walked back to his pride. The bond hadn't vanished. It had visibly faded, roughly the way a scientist studying imprinting would expect. Whatever is happening in these animals is real. It may not be permanent, and it almost certainly isn't identical to what we mean by friendship. Here's the detail that actually changes the shape of the question, and it doesn't come from elephants or whales at all. It comes from crows. Starting in 2006, a University of Washington biologist named John Marsluff trapped and banded wild crows around Seattle while wearing a rubber caveman mask, then released them unharmed. Every crow that had been captured scolded and mobbed that exact mask on site for years afterward. Brain scans later found real activity in a region of the crow brain that works much like a mammal's amygdala, the same threat processing machinery humans run on, packed into something the size of a walnut. Impressive, but not the strange part. The strange part, crows that had never been trapped, never even seen a human hold a flockmate, started mobbing the mask too. Some hadn't been born yet when the original crows were caught. That verdict wasn't staying inside one bird's memory. It moved sideways through the flock and forward through the generations, turning into something closer to inherited knowledge than personal experience. Which means the question this video opened with, why one animal remembers one human, might be the smaller question underneath a bigger one. Whether these particular humans are not the enemy is information certain species have started teaching their young the same way they teach which plants are food and which sounds mean danger. A wild-born elephant calf, unafraid. A newborn gray whale lifted to a stranger's hand, a crow mobbing a mask it never had reason to fear. Different species, different senses, the same shape underneath. Trust, or something behaving exactly like it, handed down instead of relearned from zero every generation. Which brings us back to that hillside in Cora and to the half-second before Christian's paws left the ground. Somewhere in that half-second, 100,000 years of good reasons to run from 2 upright shapes on a ridge got quietly outvoted by something newer and rarer. Not a memory of snacks, maybe not even a memory in the way we'd recognize one, but a specific, individual verdict. These two, unlike the category they belong to, are safe. And if what's happening with the elephants and the whales and the crows is even partly true, verdicts like that one aren't staying with Christian. Somewhere right now, an animal that has never met a single human being is already a little less afraid of us than its parents were, and neither we nor it has any idea yet how far that's going to travel.